The distant thunder of hooves announced the return of the cattle drive, as Clara Sutton pressed her fingertips against her cracked lips, trying to hide the imperfection that had haunted her since childhood. The scar that pulled her mouth into a permanent half-smile had made her an outcast in the small town of Redemption Creek, Wyoming Territory, 1875. She hurried to finish hanging laundry before the cowboys reached the main street, hoping to escape their inevitable taunts and whispers. Clara had been born with a perfectly symmetrical face, but a childhood accident involving a spooked horse had left her with a jagged scar that pulled the right side of her mouth upward in what appeared to be a perpetual smirk. In a town where a woman's prospects hinged largely on her appearance, Clara had resigned herself to spinsterhood at the age of 22, finding purpose in running her late parents' boarding house on the edge of town. The pounding of hooves grew closer, and Clara quickened her pace, yanking the last sheet from the basket and pinning it to the line with desperate fingers. Too late. The first riders had already rounded the corner, dust billowing behind them as they approached the main street. She ducked her head, allowing her chestnut hair to fall forward, creating a curtain between her face and the approaching men. "Miss Sutton," a voice called out, causing her stomach to clench. It was Jedediah Walsh, the banker's son, whose favorite pastime was tormenting her. "Why don't you smile for us?" "Oh, wait, you're always smiling, aren't you?" His companions laughed, the sound cutting through Clara like a knife. She grabbed her empty basket and turned toward her boarding house, keeping her eyes fixed on the ground. "Leave the lady be," a deep voice rumbled, unfamiliar and tinged with a slight southern drawl. Clara couldn't help but look up. A tall figure sat atop a magnificent black stallion, his face shadowed by a wide-brimmed hat. He wasn't from around here, she would have remembered him. His shoulders were broad beneath a dust-covered denim jacket, and a week's worth of stubble darkened his jaw. "Mind your business, stranger," Jedediah sneered. "We're just having a friendly conversation with our local oddity." The stranger dismounted in one fluid motion, and Clara noticed a slight limp as he approached Jedediah, who remained on horseback. "Doesn't seem too friendly from where I'm standing," the stranger said, his voice deceptively calm. "Where I come from, men respect ladies." Jedediah's face flushed with anger. "That's no lady. That's just Clara with her witch's grin." The stranger's hand moved to rest on his holstered revolver, not drawing it but making his meaning clear. "Apologize to the lady." Clara felt her cheeks burn with humiliation. She didn't need rescuing, especially not from some drifter who would be gone by morning. "Please," she said, "it's not worth trouble." The stranger's eyes flicked to her, and for a moment Clara saw something unexpected in his gaze, not pity but understanding. Jedediah scoffed, but clearly didn't want a confrontation with the armed stranger. "My apologies, Miss Sutton," he muttered insincerely before spurring his horse forward, his companions following suit. When they were gone, Clara turned to the stranger. "Thank you, but that wasn't necessary." "I'm accustomed to their remarks." "No one should become accustomed to cruelty," he replied, removing his hat to reveal thick brown hair and eyes the color of whiskey. "Preston Calloway," he introduced himself with a slight bow. "Recently of Texas, currently of nowhere in particular." "Clara Sutton," she replied, instinctively raising her hand to cover her mouth before catching herself and lowering it. "I run the boarding house just up the street." Preston's eyes crinkled at the corners as he smiled, and Clara noticed a long scar that ran from his temple down to his jaw on the left side of his face. "Might you have a room available, Miss Sutton? I'm looking to stay in town for a spell." Clara nodded, studying him. He was older than her, perhaps 30, with the weathered look of a man who'd spent most of his life outdoors. $3 a week, meals included," she said. her business tone masking her unease at the prospect of this intense stranger under her roof. "Sounds fair," Preston said, reaching into his pocket and producing exact change. "Lead the way, if you please." As they walked toward the boarding house, Clara couldn't help but notice how Preston's limp became more pronounced with each step. He caught her looking and offered a wry smile. "Souvenir from Gettysburg," he explained. "Been living with it for 12 years now." "You fought in the war?" Clara asked, surprised. Most veterans in these parts had fought for the Union, not the Confederacy. "I did," Preston replied, offering no further explanation. The boarding house was a 2-story structure with a wide porch and simple but sturdy furnishings. Clara's parents had built it 20 years ago when Redemption Creek was little more than a trading post. Now, with the railroad just 15 miles south, the town had grown to nearly 500 souls, and the boarding house had become a profitable enterprise. "It's not fancy," Clara warned as she led him inside, "but it's clean and the food is good." "I've slept under the stars more nights than I can count," Preston replied. "A roof and a hot meal sound like luxury." Clara showed him to a room on the 2nd floor at the end of the hallway. "Dinner's at 6, she said, handing him the key. "The washroom is down the hall and there's fresh water in the pitcher." Preston took the key, his fingers brushing against hers for the briefest moment. "Thank you kindly, Miss Sutton." Clara nodded and turned to leave, but Preston's voice stopped her. "Miss Sutton." She looked back, her hand unconsciously rising to cover her mouth once more. "Those fools in town," he said quietly. "They don't see what I see." Clara felt her cheeks flush. "And what do you see, Mr. Calloway?" "A woman of strength," he replied simply. "Strength leaves marks, same as weakness. I reckon yours are just more visible than most." Before Clara could respond, he closed the door, leaving her standing in the hallway with her heart beating inexplicably faster. That evening, Clara served dinner to her boarders, an elderly couple who had been staying with her for 3 months, a traveling salesman who came through every few weeks, and now Preston Calloway. She tried not to pay him any special attention, but found her eyes drawn to him throughout the meal. He ate with the focused efficiency of a man who had known hunger, and he listened more than he spoke, his eyes taking in everything around him. After dinner, while Clara was washing dishes in the kitchen, she heard the back door open. Preston stood there, his hat in his hands. "Mind if I smoke my pipe out here?" he asked. "Some folks don't care for the smell." "The porch is fine," Clara replied, gesturing to the back door that led to a small covered area overlooking her vegetable garden. To her surprise, Preston didn't leave but instead leaned against the doorframe, watching her work. "Where are you from originally, Miss Sutton?" "I was born right here," Clara answered, drying a plate. "My parents came from Boston in '52 during the gold rush. They didn't find gold, but they found a place to build a life." "And now it's your life," Preston observed. Clara nodded. "They died of influenza 3 winters ago, left me the house and the business." "You run it well," Preston said. "It's not easy making a home for strangers." "Is that what you are, Mr. Calloway, a stranger?" Clara asked, surprising herself with her boldness. Preston's lips curved into a half-smile that somehow reminded her of her own. "I'm a man trying to find his place," he said. "After the war, home didn't feel like home anymore. Been drifting ever since." "And what brings you to Redemption Creek? We're hardly on the way to anywhere." Preston was quiet for a moment, seemingly considering his answer. "Heard there might be work with the cattle outfits. I'm handy with horses despite the leg." Clara sensed there was more to his story but didn't press. Everyone who passed through her boarding house had secrets, and she respected their privacy. "Well, the Triple R is always looking for good hands, especially with fall roundup coming." Preston nodded, finally stepping outside onto the porch. "Thank you, Miss Sutton, for the room and the conversation." Clara finished the dishes and headed upstairs to her own quarters, a modest bedroom at the opposite end of the hall from Preston's room. As she prepared for bed, she found herself thinking about the mysterious cowboy with the scarred face and the gentle eyes who had defended her honor. It had been a long time since anyone had stood up for her. The next morning, Clara rose before dawn as was her custom and went downstairs to start breakfast. To her surprise, Preston was already in the kitchen, stoking the fire in the stove. "Mr. Calloway," she said, startled. "You're up early." "Old habits," he replied. "Thought I might make myself useful." "You're a paying guest," Clara reminded him. "You don't need to help with chores." Preston shrugged. "I've never been good at sitting idle." Clara hesitated, then relented. "Very well, there's coffee to be ground if you're offering." They worked in companionable silence, Preston grinding coffee beans while Clara mixed biscuit dough. The rhythm of their movements seemed to fit together naturally, as if they'd been sharing a kitchen for years rather than hours. As the first rays of sunlight filtered through the window, the other boarders began to stir. Clara set the table while Preston poured coffee, and soon the dining room was filled with the sounds of conversation and the clinking of silverware. After breakfast, Preston announced he would be heading to the Triple R to inquire about work. "I should be back by nightfall," he told Clara. "If not, don't hold my room." "I'll hold it for 3 days," Clara replied. "That's my policy." Preston nodded, touching the brim of his hat in a gesture of respect before heading out the door. Clara watched him go, noting how he straightened his posture and masked his limp as he walked down the main street, past the very spot where he had defended her the day before. The day passed slowly for Clara, filled with the usual tasks of running the boarding house, changing linens, sweeping floors, preparing meals. Yet her thoughts kept returning to Preston Calloway. There was something about him that intrigued her, beyond his good looks and the unexpected kindness he had shown her. Perhaps it was the recognition of a kindred spirit, someone else who carried visible scars in a world that preferred to look away. Just before sunset, Clara heard hoofbeats approaching and looked out the window to see Preston returning, his clothes covered in dust but a satisfied expression on his face. She met him at the door. "I take it you found work?" she asked. "Starting tomorrow," Preston confirmed. "They're short-handed for the roundup." "That's good news," Clara said. "Dinner's almost ready if you'd like to wash up." Preston nodded and headed upstairs, returning a short while later with his face and hands clean, his hair still damp. Over dinner, he entertained the other boarders with stories of his travels, carefully avoiding any mention of the war or his life before it. Clara noticed how he skillfully redirected questions about his past, maintaining a friendly demeanor while revealing very little of substance. After the meal, as had become their routine after just one day, Preston helped Clara with the dishes. This time, they took them out to the back porch where the evening breeze made the summer heat more bearable. "You don't talk much about yourself," Clara observed as she dried a plate. "Not much to tell that's worth hearing," Preston replied, handing her another dish. "I find that hard to believe," Clara said. "A man doesn't drift for 12 years without collecting a few stories." Preston's eyes met hers, and for a moment, Clara saw a flash of something pain, perhaps, or memory before he looked away. "Some stories are better left untold, Miss Sutton." "Clara," she corrected him impulsively. "If you're going to be staying a while, you might as well call me Clara." A smile ghosted across his lips. "Clara," he repeated as if testing the sound of her name. "Then I insist you call me Preston." "Preston," she echoed, and the name felt right on her tongue. "How long do you plan to stay in Redemption Creek?" "That depends," he said, his eyes meeting hers again. "On the work And other things. Other things? Clara asked, her heart inexplicably quickening. Before Preston could answer, they were interrupted by the sound of approaching horses. Clara frowned, setting down her dish towel and moving to the front of the house. 3 riders were dismounting in front of the boarding house, and with a sinking feeling, Clara recognized Jedediah Walsh among them. "Stay inside," Preston said, his voice taking on a hard edge she hadn't heard before. "This is my home," Clara replied firmly. "I won't hide." Preston's jaw tightened, but he nodded, following her to the front porch. "Evening, gentlemen," Clara called out, forcing her voice to remain steady. "If you're looking for rooms, I'm afraid we're full up." Jedediah's face was flushed, and Clara could smell the whiskey on him from several paces away. "We're not here for rooms," he slurred. "We're here for him." He pointed an unsteady finger at Preston. "Me." Preston's voice was calm, but Clara noticed his hand had moved closer to his holster. "What business do we have? You embarrassed me yesterday," Jedediah said, swaying slightly. "Nobody does that to a Walsh in this town." "You embarrassed yourself," Preston replied. "I merely pointed it out." Jedediah's companion snickered, which only served to further enrage him. "I'm calling you out, Calloway, right here, right now." Clara stepped forward. "This is ridiculous, Jedediah. You're drunk and making a fool of yourself. Go home before your father hears about this." Jedediah's face twisted with anger. "Stay out of this, which face?" Preston moved so quickly that Clara barely saw it happen. One moment he was beside her, the next he had Jedediah by the collar, his feet barely touching the ground. "Apologize," Preston growled, his voice dangerously low. "Now." Fear flashed across Jedediah's face as sobriety suddenly seemed to hit him. I'm sorry, Miss Sutton," he stammered. Preston released him, and Jedediah stumbled backward. "Get on your horse and ride home," Preston ordered. "And if I ever hear you speak to Miss Sutton that way again, you'll be answering to more than just words." Jedediah and his companions mounted their horses and rode off without another word. Clara turned to Preston, her heart pounding with a mixture of gratitude and concern. "That was foolish," she said. "Jedediah's father owns half the businesses in town. He could make trouble for you." "I've handled worse than spoiled bankers' sons," Preston replied, his eyes still hard as he watched the retreating figures. Then he looked at Clara, and his expression softened. "Are you all right?" "I'm fine," Clara said, though her hands were trembling slightly. "It's not the first time Jedediah has had too much to drink and said unkind things." "It should be the last," Preston said firmly. Clara studied him, this man who had twice now stood up for her when no one else would. "Why do you care?" she asked suddenly. "You don't know me." Preston was quiet for a long moment. "Maybe I recognize something in you," he finally said, "something I've been looking for without knowing it." The words hung between them, heavy with meaning neither was ready to acknowledge. Clara felt a blush creep up her neck and was grateful for the dim light of dusk that hid it. "We should finish the dishes," she said, turning back toward the house. Preston followed her, and they completed their task in silence, the air between them charged with unspoken thoughts. As the days turned into weeks, Preston settled into a routine. He rode out to the Triple R Ranch before dawn each morning and returned after sunset, exhausted but seemingly content. On Sundays, his day off, he attended church with Clara and helped with repairs around the boarding house, fixing loose boards on the porch, patching the roof, mending furniture. His presence became a comfort to Clara, a steady constant in her otherwise solitary life. The other boarders came and went, but Preston remained, paying his rent promptly each week and never complaining about the simple accommodations or the occasional bland meal. Clara found herself looking forward to their evening conversations on the back porch, where Preston would sometimes share bits and pieces of his travels, the vastness of the Texas plains, the rugged beauty of the Colorado mountains, the bustle of Kansas City. One Sunday in late September, nearly a month after Preston's arrival in Redemption Creek, Clara mentioned that she needed to pick apples from the small orchard behind the boarding house before the first frost. "I'll help," Preston offered immediately. They spent the afternoon in the orchard, Preston climbing the ladders to reach the highest branches while Clara sorted the apples into baskets below. The air was crisp with the first hint of autumn, and the sun cast a golden glow over the trees. "My mother used to make the best apple pies," Clara said as she examined a particularly perfect specimen. "People would come from miles around just to taste them." "Did she teach you her secret?" Preston asked, descending the ladder with a full basket. Clara nodded. "But I can never seem to make them quite as good as hers." "I'd be happy to be the judge of that," Preston said with a smile that made Clara's heart flutter. "Are you asking me to bake you a pie, Mr. Calloway?" Clara teased, falling back into formality to mask her sudden nervousness. "I'm suggesting an exchange," Preston replied. "You bake a pie and I'll tell you a story, a real one about me." Clara's curiosity was piqued. Despite their many conversations, Preston had revealed little about his past beyond vague references to the war and his years of drifting. "What kind of story?" "The kind that explains why a man might wander for 12 years, Preston said, his eyes serious now. "The kind I don't tell often." Clara nodded slowly. "I'll need to bake the pie anyway to preserve these apples. You have yourself a deal." That evening, after the other boarders had retired, Clara and Preston sat at the kitchen table, a freshly baked apple pie between them. The rich aroma of cinnamon and baked apples filled the room, and Clara felt a nervous anticipation as she cut 2 generous slices. Preston took a bite and closed his eyes, savoring the taste. "Your mother would be proud," he said after swallowing. "This is the finest pie I've had since leaving home." Clara felt a warm glow of pleasure at his praise. "Thank you. Now I believe you owe me a story." Preston set down his fork and took a deep breath. "Before the war, I was engaged to be married," he began. "Her name was Annabelle. We grew up together in a small town outside of Austin. I joined the Confederate Army believing I was fighting for states' rights and for her future." He touched the scar on his face unconsciously. "I got this at Gettysburg, along with the bad leg. Spent 6 months in a Union prison camp before they sent me home as part of a prisoner exchange. By then, the South was losing and everything was different." Preston's eyes grew distant. "Annabelle had married my cousin while I was gone. She thought I was dead, they all did, and I can't blame her for seeking security in those uncertain times." "What did you do?" Clara asked softly. "I left," Preston said simply. "Couldn't bear to stay and watch them build a life together. So I started riding, taking work where I could find at cattle drives, ranch hands, even mining for a spell. Never stayed anywhere long enough to put down roots." "Until now," Clara ventured. Preston's eyes met hers. "I'm still figuring that part out." Clara nodded, understanding the weight of what he had shared. "Thank you for telling me." "Thank you for listening," Preston replied. "And for the pie." As they finished their dessert, Clara felt a shift in their relationship, a deepening of trust that both thrilled and frightened her. For the first time in years, she was allowing herself to hope for something more than the solitary life she had resigned herself to. The next morning, Clara was surprised to find Preston still at the boarding house after sunrise. "No work today?" she asked as she prepared breakfast. "Taking a few days off," Preston explained. "Roundup's finished and the foreman gave some of us time before the winter work begins." "Do you have plans?" Clara asked, trying to sound casual. "Thought I might ride into Laramie for supplies," Preston said. "Would you care to join me?" Clara nearly dropped the pan she was holding. Laramie, that's a full day's journey. We could stay overnight at the hotel there, Preston suggested, then quickly added, separate rooms, of course. I just thought you might appreciate a change of scenery. You mentioned once that you rarely leave Redemption Creek. Clara hesitated. She hadn't left town in over 3 years, not since her parents died. The boarding house demanded her constant attention, and there had never been anyone to go with her. But the idea of a day away, especially in Preston's company, was tempting. I'd have to find someone to look after the boarding house, she said. Mrs. Peterson from the church mentioned she'd be happy to help if you ever needed a day off, Preston reminded her. She told me so just last Sunday. Clara realized he had been planning this. You've given this some thought, haven't you? Preston smiled. Maybe a little. Is that a yes? Yes, Clara replied, surprising herself with the sureness of her answer. I'd like that very much. 2 days later, Clara found herself riding beside Preston on the trail to Laramie, seated comfortably on a gentle mare borrowed from the Triple R. Mrs. Peterson had eagerly agreed to watch over the boarding house, insisting that Clara deserved a break after years of uninterrupted work. The journey took them through rolling hills and open prairie, the landscape painted in the rich golds and reds of autumn. Preston pointed out landmarks and shared stories of his travels, and Clara found herself laughing more than she had in years. For these precious hours, she forgot about her scar, forgot about the whispers and stares that followed her in Redemption Creek, forgot about everything except the joy of the moment and the man riding beside her. They reached Laramie by late afternoon, a bustling town much larger than Redemption Creek. Clara felt a momentary panic at the crowds, instinctively raising her hand to cover her mouth, but Preston gently caught her wrist. "Don't hide," he said softly. "Not here, not with me." Clara slowly lowered her hand, fighting against years of ingrained habit. Preston smiled at her, his eyes warm with approval, and she felt a surge of confidence that carried her through the streets of Laramie with her head held high. They secured rooms at a respectable hotel, and Preston suggested they meet for dinner at 6. Clara used the time to refresh herself, washing away the dust of the trail and changing into her best dress, a simple blue cotton that her mother had sewn for her 21st birthday. As she pinned up her hair, she caught sight of her reflection in the mirror, and for once, didn't immediately focus on her crooked smile. Instead, she noticed the sparkle in her eyes and the healthy flush in her cheeks. Preston was waiting for her in the hotel lobby, and the appreciative look in his eyes when he saw her made Clara's breath catch. He had cleaned up as well, his usually dusty clothes replaced by a crisp white shirt and dark vest, his hair neatly combed. "You look beautiful," he said simply, offering her his arm. "Thank you," Clara replied, accepting it. "You clean up rather well yourself." They dined at the hotel restaurant, a far more elegant establishment than anything in Redemption Creek. Preston ordered wine and they toasted to their adventure. The food was delicious, but Clara barely tasted it, too caught up in the magic of the evening and the man across from her. After dinner, Preston suggested a walk through town. The streets were lit with gas lamps, casting a warm glow over the wooden sidewalks and brick buildings. They strolled arm in arm, peering into shop windows and stopping to listen to a street musician playing a fiddle on the corner. "I haven't done anything like this since before my parents died," Clara confessed as they paused by a fountain in the town square. "I'd forgotten how wonderful it feels to simply live." "You've been surviving," Preston said, his voice gentle. "There's a difference." Clara nodded, understanding exactly what he meant. "What about you? Are you still just surviving, Preston?" He was quiet for a long moment, looking up at the stars that were beginning to appear in the darkening sky. "I thought I was," he finally said, "until I came to Redemption Creek. Until I met you." Clara's heart pounded in her chest. "What changed?" Preston turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. "For 12 years I've been running from ghosts, Annabelle, the war, the man I used to be. I convinced myself I was looking for something, but really, I was just afraid to stop moving long enough to feel anything real." He reached up and gently traced the line of Clara's scar with his fingertip. "Then I saw you, standing so brave in the face of cruelty, and something inside me woke up. I saw your smile, yes, your crooked, beautiful smile, and I realized it was the first genuine thing I'd seen in years." Clara trembled at his touch but didn't pull away. "Most people see only the flaw." "I see strength," Preston said. "I see a woman who endured pain and kept her heart open anyway." "Your smile isn't crooked, Clara, it's perfect. Perfect because it's real, because it's yours." Tears welled in Clara's eyes as years of shame began to crumble under the weight of Preston's words. No one had ever spoken to her this way, had ever looked at her with such genuine admiration. "May I kiss you, Clara?" Preston asked, his voice husky with emotion. Clara nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. Preston leaned forward, his lips meeting hers with exquisite tenderness. The kiss was brief but filled with promise, and when they parted, Clara felt as though something fundamental had shifted in her world. "I think I'm falling in love with you," Preston whispered, his forehead resting against hers. "I think I'm already there," Clara admitted, the words flowing freely from her heart. They walked back to the hotel hand in hand, reluctant to part at their respective doors but mindful of propriety. Clara fell asleep that night with the memory of Preston's kiss on her lips and the knowledge that, for the first time in her life, a man saw beyond her scar to the woman beneath. The return journey to Redemption Creek the next day was filled with shared glances and shy smiles, their newfound feelings adding a layer of sweetness to every interaction. They stopped for a picnic lunch beside a creek, sitting close together on a blanket Preston had packed. "What happens when we get back?" Clara asked, voicing the concern that had been growing as they drew closer to town. "People will talk. Let them," Preston said firmly. "I've never cared much for other people's opinions." "It's different for you," Clara pointed out. "You could leave any time." "I have to live there." Preston took her hand. "Clara, I'm not going anywhere, not unless you ask me to." She studied his face, searching for any sign of uncertainty and finding none. "You're serious." "Completely," he assured her. "I've been drifting for too long. I want to stay, to build something real with you if you'll have me." Clara's heart soared at his words, but caution tempered her joy. "We've known each other such a short time. Some people search their whole lives and never find what we have," Preston said. "I don't need more time to know what I feel for you is real." Clara leaned forward and kissed him, a more confident kiss than their first, filled with growing certainty. "Then we'll face whatever comes together." They returned to Redemption Creek by late afternoon, and as expected, their arrival together drew curious stares and whispers. Clara held her head high, drawing strength from Preston's presence beside her. Mrs. Peterson greeted them with knowing eyes, but made no comment beyond asking if they had enjoyed their trip. That evening, after the other boarders had gone to bed, Clara and Preston sat on the back porch, watching fireflies dance in the garden. Preston's arm was around her shoulders and Clara leaned into his warmth, still marveling at the turn her life had taken. "I've been thinking," Preston said, breaking the comfortable silence. "About my room." Clara looked up at him, confused. "Is something wrong with it?" "Not at all," Preston assured her. "But I'm wondering if I might find more permanent accommodations in town. It doesn't seem right, now that things have changed between us, for me to be living under your roof." Clara understood his concern for her reputation. Where would you go? I saw a small cabin for rent near the livery, Preston said. It's nothing fancy, but it would do until. Until what? Clara prompted when he trailed off. Preston took a deep breath. Until we decide what comes next for us. Clara nodded slowly. That seems sensible. The following week brought significant changes. Preston moved into the cabin, though he still took most of his meals at the boarding house. Their courtship proceeded with a mixture of traditional restraint and moments of startling intimacy, long conversations about their hopes and fears, walks through town that deliberately invited public scrutiny, stolen kisses in the orchard when they thought no one was looking. The town's reaction was mixed. Some, like Mrs. Peterson and the elderly couple who boarded with Clara, approved of the match and went out of their way to show their support. Others, particularly Jedediah Walsh and his circle, made their disapproval known through pointed remarks and cold shoulders. One evening in early October, Preston arrived at the boarding house for dinner with a troubled expression. Clara immediately sensed something was wrong. "What is it?" she asked as they stepped onto the back porch after the meal. "I lost my job at the Triple R," Preston said, his voice tight with anger. "Apparently, Mr. Walsh suggested to the owner that employing me might not be good for business." Clara's hand flew to her mouth in shock. "Because of me? Because of us?" Preston nodded grimly. "It seems Jedediah has been nursing his wounded pride." "What will you do?" Clara asked, fear gripping her heart. Would this be the moment Preston decided Redemption Creek and she weren't worth the trouble? To her surprise, Preston smiled. "I've been offered a partnership in the livery stable. Old man Jenkins has been looking to retire, and he approached me this afternoon when he heard about the Triple R." Relief washed over Clara. "That's wonderful news. It means I'll be staying in Redemption Creek permanently," Preston said, taking her hands in his. "If that's what you want." "It's all I want," Clara assured him, stepping into his embrace. 2 days later, Clara was sweeping the front porch when she heard the now familiar sound of Jedediah Walsh's horse approaching. She straightened her spine, determined not to be intimidated. "Good morning, Miss Sutton," Jedediah called out, his tone falsely pleasant. "I hear your cowboy lost his job at the Triple R. Shame that." "Mr. Calloway has found other employment," Clara replied coolly. "Not that it's any of your concern." Jedediah dismounted, tying his horse to the hitching post. "Everything in this town is my concern," he said, stepping onto the porch. "My father built Redemption Creek from nothing." "Your father, perhaps," Clara corrected him. "Not you." Anger flashed in Jedediah's eyes. "You think you're something special now that you've got a man paying attention to you. He'll leave once he gets tired of looking at that face." Clara flinched but stood her ground. "You don't know anything about Preston or what he sees in me." "I know he's just passing through, same as all the drifters," Jedediah sneered. "And when he's gone, you'll still be the town freak with the witch's grin." "That's enough." The voice came from behind Clara, but it wasn't Preston's. It was Mr. Jenkins, the livery owner who had been delivering feed to Clara's chickens. "You've got no business speaking to Miss Sutton that way, boy," Jedediah scoffed. "Stay out of this, old man." "I will not," Mr. Jenkins said firmly, coming to stand beside Clara. "Miss Sutton is a respected businesswoman in this town and has been nothing but kind to everyone, including you and your family when your mother was ill last winter." Clara was surprised by the defense. Mr. Jenkins had always been polite to her, but never particularly friendly. "Furthermore," the old man continued, "Preston Calloway is my new business partner, and I won't have you slandering him or the woman he cares for. If your father knew you were harassing Miss Sutton, he'd be ashamed." Jedediah's face flushed with anger, but he seemed uncertain how to respond to the unexpected opposition. "My father will hear about this," he finally muttered, untying his horse and mounting. "I certainly hope so," Mr. Jenkins called after him as he rode away. When Jedediah was gone, Clara turned to the older man with grateful eyes. "Thank you, Mr. Jenkins. You didn't have to do that." "Yes, I did," he replied with a gentle smile. "This town has treated you poorly for too long, Miss Sutton. It's time that changed." That evening, Clara shared the encounter with Preston, who was furious that Jedediah had confronted her again, but touched by Mr. Jenkins's intervention. "It seems not everyone in town is against us," Preston observed. "Maybe not," Clara agreed, "but Jedediah won't give up easily." Preston's expression grew serious. "Clara, there's something I need to ask you." Clara's heart skipped a beat at his tone. "What is it?" "I've been thinking about our future," Preston began, taking her hands in his. "About what I want, what you might want. I know it hasn't been long, but when you know something is right, time doesn't seem to matter much." Clara held her breath, hardly daring to hope for what his words might be leading to. "I love you, Clara Sutton," Preston said, his voice steady and sure. "I love your strength, your kindness, your courage. I love the way you care for others, the way you've built a life for yourself despite every obstacle. And yes, I love your smile, that beautiful, crooked smile that first caught my attention and made me see you, really see you." Tears welled in Clara's eyes as Preston continued. "I don't have much to offer except my heart and my promise to stand by you, to build a life with you, to face whatever comes our way together. But if that's enough, I'd be honored if you would consider becoming my wife." For a moment, Clara couldn't speak past the emotion clogging her throat. Then she found her voice. "Yes," she whispered, then louder. "Yes, Preston Calloway, I will marry you." Preston's face broke into a radiant smile as he pulled her into his arms, kissing her with a passion that left her breathless. When they finally parted, he reached into his pocket and produced a simple gold band. "It was my mother's," he explained as he slipped it onto her finger. "I've carried it with me all these years, waiting for the right woman to give it to." Clara admired the ring, its modest elegance perfectly suited to her tastes. "It's beautiful," she said, "and it fits perfectly." "Like it was meant for you," Preston agreed, kissing her again. They decided to announce their engagement the following Sunday at church, where most of the town would be gathered. The days leading up to the announcement were filled with quiet joy as they began to plan their future together. Preston would continue his partnership with Mr. Jenkins at the livery, and they would live at the boarding house, which would provide a steady income while they saved for a home of their own. Sunday arrived, and Clara dressed with particular care, choosing her best dress and arranging her hair in an elegant style her mother had taught her. Preston met her at the boarding house, looking handsome in a new suit he had ordered from the general store. "Ready?" he asked, offering his arm. Clara took a deep breath and nodded. "Ready." The church was nearly full when they arrived, and heads turned as they walked down the aisle together to a pew near the front. Clara could hear the whispers but focused on Preston's reassuring presence beside her. After the service, before the congregation could disperse, Preston stood and requested a moment of the pastor's time. The murmurs increased as he led Clara to the front of the church. "Friends and neighbors," Preston began, his voice carrying clearly through the sanctuary. "I have an announcement to make. Yesterday, I asked Miss Clara Sutton to do me the great honor of becoming my wife, and she has consented." A hush fell over the church, followed by a smattering of applause led by Mrs. Peterson and Mr. Jenkins. Clara scanned the faces before her, seeing a mixture of surprise, approval, and in some cases, dismay. "We plan to be married here in this church 4 weeks from today," Preston continued, "and we hope you will join us in celebration." More applause followed, growing stronger as people rose to their feet. Clara was overwhelmed by the unexpected show of support. Even those who had been less than kind to her in the past seemed caught up in the moment, standing and clapping along with the others. Only one figure remained seated: Jedediah Walsh, his face dark with anger. Beside him, his father, the banker Mr. Howard Walsh, looked thoughtful rather than upset. As the congregation began to disperse, offering congratulations to the engaged couple, Mr. Walsh approached them. "Miss Sutton, Mr. Calloway," he said formally, "may I offer my congratulations?" "Thank you, Mr. Walsh," Clara replied, surprised by the gesture. "I understand my son has caused you some distress," the banker continued, his expression grave. "I want to assure you that his behavior does not reflect the values of our family or this community. He will be making no further trouble for either of you." Preston nodded, extending his hand to the older man. "We appreciate that, sir." Mr. Walsh shook Preston's hand, then turned to Clara. "My wife would be pleased if you would call on her this week, Miss Sutton. She would like to offer her assistance with your wedding preparations." Clara was stunned by the unexpected offer. Mrs. Walsh was the town's most prominent citizen, and her support would effectively silence any remaining opposition to the match. "I would be honored," she managed to reply. As Mr. Walsh walked away, Clara turned to Preston with wide eyes. "Did that just happen?" Preston smiled, squeezing her hand. "It seems Redemption Creek is finally living up to its name." The weeks leading up to the wedding passed in a whirlwind of preparations. Mrs. Walsh proved to be a formidable ally, organizing a group of town women to help with everything from Clara's wedding dress to the decorations for the church. Clara was touched by the sudden change in how the town treated her. The same women who had once whispered behind their hands now invited her to tea and offered advice on married life. Preston threw himself into renovating part of the boarding house to create a private apartment for them, working late into the night after finishing his duties at the livery. He and Clara spent every evening together, planning their future and growing ever more certain of their decision to marry. Jedediah Walsh was notably absent from town events, having been sent by his father to attend to business interests in Denver, a convenient arrangement that would keep him away through the wedding and beyond. The night before the ceremony, Clara sat on the back porch with Preston, watching the stars emerge in the clear November sky. A light frost covered the ground, but they were warm beneath a thick woolen blanket. "Are you nervous about tomorrow?" Preston asked, his arm around her shoulders. "A little," Clara admitted. "Not about marrying you," she quickly added. "Just about being the center of attention." Preston understood. Despite the town's recent change of heart, Clara had spent too many years avoiding notice to be entirely comfortable with all eyes on her. "Just look at me," he advised. "Pretend no one else is there." Clara smiled, her scar pulling her mouth into the crooked expression that Preston had come to love so dearly. "That's easy enough. You're all I see anyway." The wedding day dawned clear and cold, the kind of perfect autumn day that seemed designed for new beginnings. Clara was surrounded by helpers as she prepared: Mrs. Peterson fixing her hair, Mrs. Walsh adjusting her veil, even young Sally from the general store bringing a bouquet of late-blooming wildflowers mixed with evergreen sprigs. The dress was simple but elegant, ivory satin with delicate lace at the collar and cuffs. It had been Mrs. Walsh's, offered to Clara in a gesture of reconciliation that meant more than any purchased gown could have. As Clara stood before the mirror, fully dressed and ready, she barely recognized herself. The woman reflected back at her wasn't the scarred outcast she had believed herself to be for so long, but a radiant bride, beautiful in her joy and confidence. "You look stunning," Mrs. Peterson said, tears in her eyes. "Your parents would be so proud." Clara felt their absence keenly in that moment, but took comfort in knowing they would have approved of Preston and the life she was choosing. The church bells began to ring, signaling it was time. Clara took a deep breath and allowed Mrs. Walsh to lead her to the church, where Mr. Jenkins waited to escort her down the aisle in place of her father. The church was filled to capacity, the entire town having turned out for the occasion. As the doors opened and the organ began to play, Clara's eyes sought and found Preston, standing tall and handsome at the altar. Following his advice, she focused solely on him, letting his loving gaze guide her forward. The ceremony was brief but meaningful, their vows spoken clearly for all to hear. When the pastor pronounced them husband and wife, Preston gently lifted Clara's veil and kissed her, his tenderness conveying all the love words could not express. The celebration afterward at the town hall was joyous, with music and dancing lasting well into the evening. Clara danced with her new husband until her feet ached, then sat beside him, watching the townspeople celebrate with an enthusiasm that suggested they had always supported the match. "Happy?" Preston asked, squeezing her hand. "Completely," Clara replied, leaning against his shoulder. "I never imagined my life could be like this." "This is just the beginning," Preston promised. "The best is yet to come." As the party wound down, the couple slipped away to the boarding house, where their new apartment awaited. Preston carried Clara over the threshold, both of them laughing at the traditional gesture. The rooms were simple but comfortable, transformed by Preston's hard work and Clara's eye for beauty. A fire crackled in the hearth, casting a warm glow over their wedding gifts and the furnishings they had chosen together. "Welcome home, Mrs. Calloway," Preston said, setting Clara gently on her feet. "I like the sound of that," Clara replied, wrapping her arms around his neck. Clara Calloway. Their first night as husband and wife was everything Clara had dreamed of, tender, passionate, and filled with the promise of all the nights to come. In Preston's arms, she felt beautiful and whole, her scar no longer a mark of shame, but simply part of the woman he loved so completely. Winter settled over Redemption Creek, blanketing the town in snow and turning the boarding house into a haven of warmth and comfort. Clara and Preston settled into married life with an ease that surprised them both, their rhythms and routines meshing as if they had been together for years, rather than months. The livery business thrived under Preston's management, and Clara's boarding house was busier than ever, thanks in part to Mrs. Walsh's recommendation to her husband's business associates who traveled through the area. The apartment Preston had created for them became a cozy retreat, separate from the business but close enough for Clara to manage both her new role as wife and her responsibilities as proprietress. As Christmas approached, Preston surprised Clara with plans for a proper home of their own. He had purchased a plot of land on the edge of town, not far from the boarding house but with enough space for a garden and perhaps, someday, children to play. "We'll start building in the spring," he told her as they walked the property, their breath forming clouds in the cold air. "Nothing fancy at first, but we can add to it as we go." Clara pictured it a home filled with love and laughter, the family she had never dared to dream of having. "It sounds perfect," she said, squeezing his hand. Christmas Eve brought a snowstorm that kept most of the town indoors, including the boarders who had nowhere else to go. Clara and Preston hosted a small gathering in their apartment, sharing mulled cider and cookies with their guests. As the evening wore on and the boarders retired to their rooms, Clara and Preston sat before the fire, exchanging their gifts. Preston gave Clara a delicate gold locket containing a miniature portrait of the two of them, painted by an artist who had stayed at the boarding house the previous month. Clara, in turn, presented Preston with a fine leather-bound journal and a silver pen. "For your stories," she explained. "All those adventures you had before we met, they should be preserved." Preston was touched by the thoughtful gift. "I'll write them for our children someday," he said, "so they'll know where their father came from and how he found his way home." Clara's eyes filled with tears at the mention of children. "About that," she said softly, "I have one more gift for you." Preston looked at her questioningly. "Dr. Miller confirmed it yesterday," Clara said, a smile spreading across her face. "We're going to have a baby, Preston. In summer." For a moment, Preston simply stared at her, processing the news. Then his face broke into a radiant smile, and he gathered Clara into his arms, holding her as if she were the most precious thing in the world. "A baby," he whispered against her hair. "Our baby," Clara nodded, tears of joy streaming down her face. "Our family is beginning." Preston placed a gentle hand on her still flat stomach, awe in his expression. "Thank you," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "for everything, for your love for our child, for giving me a reason to stop wandering." "Thank you for seeing me," Clara replied, touching his cheek. "Really seeing me when no one else would look past this." She traced the line of her scar. Preston kissed her then, tenderly at first, then with growing passion. "Your smile saved me, Clara," he said when they parted. "That first day in town, when everyone else was laughing and you held your head high anyway, that crooked, beautiful smile showed me what real courage looks like." Clara rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. Outside, the snow continued to fall, covering Redemption Creek in a blanket of white that promised a fresh start. Inside, by the warmth of their fire, Clara and Preston Calloway held each other close, grateful for the twist of fate that had brought them together and the love that had healed them both. As the years passed, Redemption Creek grew and prospered, as did the Calloway family. The small house Preston built became a larger one as their family expanded, first with the birth of their daughter Emily in the summer following their wedding, then 2 years later with twin boys, Joseph and James. Clara continued to run the boarding house, hiring help as needed but never fully relinquishing the business her parents had built. Preston's partnership with Mr. Jenkins evolved into full ownership of the livery, which expanded to include a blacksmith shop and carriage service, as the railroad finally reached Redemption Creek in 1882. The scar that had once defined Clara's life became merely an afterthought, a quirk that their children found endearing rather than frightening. "Mama's special smile," Emily called it, often tracing it with her tiny finger when Clara told bedtime stories. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Preston took Clara back to Laramie, to the same hotel where they had first acknowledged their feelings for each other. The children stayed with Mrs. Peterson, now a beloved grandmother figure to them, while Clara and Preston enjoyed 3 days of reminiscing and renewing their connection away from the demands of their busy lives. On their last night in Laramie, they sat on a bench in the town square, near the fountain where they had shared their first kiss. The town had grown considerably in the decade since their last visit, but the square remained largely unchanged. 10 years, Preston mused, his arm around Clara's shoulders. "Sometimes it feels like yesterday that I rode into Redemption Creek. And sometimes it feels like you've always been there," Clara replied, leaning into his embrace. At 32, she had grown more confident and comfortable in her own skin, the years of love and acceptance having erased much of her earlier insecurity. Preston, now 40, had a few strands of gray in his hair and deeper lines around his eyes, but he was still as handsome to Clara as he had been on that first day. His limp was more pronounced in cold weather, but it rarely slowed him down, especially when chasing after their energetic children. "Do you ever regret it?" Clara asked suddenly. "Settling down with me instead of continuing your adventures?" Preston turned to look at her, surprise evident in his expression. "Not for a single moment," he said firmly. "Every day with you is an adventure, Clara. Watching our children grow, building our home, being part of a community, these are the things that matter, not the wandering." Clara smiled, the familiar pull of her scar a reminder of how far she had come. "I was so afraid when we first met," she confessed. "Afraid to hope, afraid to believe someone could see past this." She touched her mouth. Preston took her hand, kissing her fingers gently. "Your scar is part of you, but it never defined you, not to me. It was your heart I fell in love with, your spirit, your strength." "You taught me to see myself differently," Clara said, "to recognize my own worth." "No," Preston corrected her. "I just reflected back what was always there. You're the one who found the courage to believe it." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. The decade they had shared had not been without challenges. The difficult birth of the twins, a fire that had nearly destroyed the livery, the year when drought had threatened the entire region. But they had faced each obstacle together, their bond growing stronger with each test. "What do you think the next 10 years will bring?" Clara asked as they finally rose to return to their hotel. Preston smiled, taking her hand. "More of this," he said simply. "More love, more family, more building the life we've chosen together." "That sounds perfect," Clara replied, returning his smile without a trace of the self-consciousness that had once plagued her. As they walked back to the hotel, Clara reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. From the lonely young woman hiding behind her hand to the confident wife and mother she had become. Each step had been part of a transformation she could never have imagined on that fateful day, when a dusty cowboy had defended her honor on the streets of Redemption Creek. Preston had been right all those years ago. Her crooked smile had indeed saved him, giving him a reason to stop running and start building. And in return, his love had saved her, showing her that what others saw as a flaw could be the very thing that made her beautiful in the eyes of the right person. Together, they had created a life filled with purpose and joy, proving that true beauty lay not in perfection but in the courage to embrace one's unique path. And as they returned to their hotel room, hands clasped and hearts full, Clara knew with absolute certainty that their greatest adventures still lay ahead, not in distant lands or dramatic escapades, but in the everyday miracle of loving and being loved, completely and without reservation, exactly as they were.